Hello and welcome to the final CGC show for season 2. It's been a great season. We've had lots of guests, lots of lessons. It's been a really great couple of months, 2-3 months. I'm not sure how long it's gone, but it's been wonderful to spend every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon with such fine people. A lot of people, if you're watching on Facebook, most of the people are on the YouTube channel, Classical Guitar Corner, and the chat is vivacious. And a lot of people saying hello and connecting, relationships still sustaining throughout all these different times and different places. Today we're going to have 4 out of the 5 people in the CGC team, the 4 that have been doing the exam responses, and I'm sure that 5th one will probably be recruited for next time. So today it's going to be Nikki Todesco, Dave Belcher, and James Erickson, and we're going to be talking about the exams that we've been going through. We're not quite finished yet. It's been, as always, it's a big full month. We've got Oktoberfest starting tomorrow, and Nikki Todesco has been putting a ton of work into that. Anyway, there's things always going on. We always tend to bite off more than we can chew at CGC. So the exams with 124 submissions back in September are getting close to be done, but not quite there yet. So thank you everyone for your patience. What else can I say? I'm just gas bagging until we call the people we really want to see. If you're new to CGC, welcome. I know a lot of people here are going to be people who hang out to watch the show each week, which is amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the people. Actually, hands up in the chat if you've managed to catch every single show of the CGC show this season. I think there might be some people. And thank you to everybody for turning up. I mean, it would be pretty lonely without you. And it's lovely to see the chat fly by on the side of my screen because it makes it feel very alive and like I'm not just talking to myself. Everyone at the moment is saying they're very much looking forward to Oktoberfest. So that's great. But if you are new, basically what CGC is, and I think, we did a survey about a year ago and it was amazing how many people didn't really understand what CGC is and what we do in the academy, but in essence, it's an online school for classical guitar. And the way I've always viewed it is actually kind of like a brick and mortar school. I think of the schools that I went to and the way they operated with integrity and respect and expectations to a certain degree. And that's how I run it. And I've been so fortunate to be joined by wonderful teachers, of which you'll meet 3 others shortly. And we have a curriculum that we go through that's quite comprehensive. There's always more that we can be added and explored, but it's quite comprehensive. And the real benefit of it is that it takes you down a path that does provide all the things that you need to know to progress and improve, and the information along the way. But of course, the challenge with all of this learning, because the information is not it's not a valuable resource these days. You can get information on the internet anyway. But what's really valuable is the experience on that journey. If you are enthused, if you are joyful, if you are appreciative, if you're giving, all of these things, that will make the learning experience totally different. And part of it is the contribution from all the teachers that have been involved in CGC, but another huge part is the community. And it's amazing how this community has just come about. I mean, I always remember the first day of the first CGC summer school where I was thinking that I would go into the dining hall where everyone kind of was congregating the first time. And I thought there'd be kind of an awkward silence, with people filing their nails and eyeing people at the side of their eye for the first time. But everyone was chatting up a storm. So that was a really memorable moment for me where I thought, this is an exceptional and special community of people. So it's very much, as they say, it takes a village, and this is a great example. So, as people go through the exams, right, we have partitions on our journey of learning. And as people go through that journey, we have points where people, if they choose to, they don't have to, they can submit an exam. And this is a way that you can get personal feedback, quite substantial and comprehensive personal feedback, saying, what I deemed as the really important thing to communicate is, are you ready to move forward? and take on more difficult things. And as I'm sure many of you heard me say, I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face is imposed by ourselves, our enthusiasm for the music that we play and want to play, and we take on material that's too difficult for us. And that leads to frustration, that leads to establishing of poor habits and technique and whatnot. And so, and we're going to talk a little bit about the process of passing to the next grade or resubmitting or staying where you are and what that means. But the real goal, and what we always come back to when we're talking about exams, is should we say confidently as a teacher, yes, I think you're ready to progress on to more difficult material. That's as they say in Star Trek, that's the prime directive for our exams. It's not, that's it. That's always just comes down to that. There's often quite a bit of back and forth on certain exams, but that's, if you want to answer that question, is that do we want to say to this person, yes, please start going on to more difficult material? And that seems to answer the process. All right. Yes. Rick Lord, dreaming of Endicott next June. You and me both, Rick. I have high hopes and very optimistic about getting together back in person in the summer next year. All right. Well, it is 4:09. I have gas bagged a whole 9 minutes, and I think it's about time to call everyone. Okay, so this is going to be a large amount of guests. I shall call Mr. Dave Belcher first. Very quick. You didn't even get. I didn't even get 3 head bobs in. All right. So it sometimes takes a little while. There you are. You're coming up now. All right. Hang with me. I'm going to call the others. I'm going to fingers crossed for technology, everyone. Oh, I can call. I can do it at the same time. There's a Nikki. Fingers crossed. Technology. I'm transporting them from the chat. There's a Nikki. There's James. All right, here we go. Now I'm going to put up. Voila.
Yeah, we're in.
We're now a quartet.
Well,
thanks everyone for joining in. I think it's really lovely. I think we all. Dave, have you been on a show this season yet?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, this is your season 2 debut, and it makes sense to have us. We've all been in the chat all this time, and now we're all on the screen. So awesome. Yeah. Well, without further ado, let's dive in. So we had a little powwow before the meeting, and we went through some topics. So I'm just going to go in the order. We all have 3 little topics we're going to talk about, and reflecting on the exams. James, followed by Nikki, followed by Dave, and then I'll come in at the end. So, James, how's your exam experience been so far?
It's been amazing, just to see how much work everybody's put into these exams, and something that really, was a nice thing to see is how much support everybody gets when they post their exam to the forum, and it's just the sense of community is just really inspiring to me. It makes me want to get in there and do more of these evaluations, and it really keeps me going. But I think, overall, very, very positive experience, and a few things that I, had written down that I saw that were kind of consistent throughout most people's exams. There was a few issues that I thought might be good to address for people going into the 4th grade, going into grade 4. And do you want me to hit them all now, or?
Yeah, let's just go from one by one. Yeah.
So the first one would be, and this could be for other grades as well, the idea to metronome or not to metronome. That is the question. And usually, I guess this comes up more with the, of course, with the practice routines. And I think, just overall with the metronome, and I'd like to see, maybe what you guys think too. It's a very useful tool, of course. And I think though sometimes, when grading the exams, it can be a little distracting when somebody just has the metronome on and then little by little they kind of lose focus of it, and then it's just this sound that's kind of in the background, and they're not really staying to it. And also sometimes the placement of the metronome, I've had it where people have maybe put it too close to their camera, the audio source. So I've just heard like this really loud metronome and then seen this air guitar kind of happening behind it. So, I mean, of course, we use it as a tool to try to build, this sort of, in kind of internal sense of rhythm. And I think sometimes it can be useful. Like, for example, I've had people do, if you've done grade 4, you've done practice routine 10, and about those first two, especially the rhythm number 1 with the ta 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 ta. I got it like memorized by now. And I think sometimes I've had people, kind of use the metronome as sort of a guide to start with, and then they'll shut it off and then they'll play it. Sometimes they'll try to play with it, and the timing does kind of fluctuate. And then sometimes the metronome's going and it's just in the background. It's kind of like not really locked in. So one thing I suggested to a lot of people with that particular rhythm is to practice with their metronome and almost just like I did there, just articulate, vocalize the rhythm before even bringing it to their guitar. So you sort of have a sense of what that's going to sound like when you then go to put your fingers on the strings and play it. So sometimes I think on a whole, I think the submissions, sometimes the practice routines could be beneficial without the metronome. So I just wondered what you guys thought of that as well.
Dave, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had similar submissions where folks have the metronome going and they're not paying attention to it at all. It's just that background noise. And what's amazing is how well folks stay in the pocket. They're like pure pulse, even though there's this other rhythm going on behind them. It's really spectacular, actually. So in those instances, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's better to just turn the metronome off than to have it as distracting background noise that you're not paying attention to. But I do also think it's a useful tool, like you mentioned. And when I sense someone is most in tuned to the pulse is when they have the metronome going and they get off from it, and then they're able to get back on. So they can course correct. That means they're really listening, and it's not just background noise. And that means if they turn the metronome off, then, if they start to speed up in one of the repertoire pieces, they're more likely to be able to get back onto the pulse because they'll notice they're speeding up. So I think that's sort of the whole purpose is to get you attuned to that internal pulse. Right. But it's just a practice tool.
Nice. And James, you also mentioned some practice with the mirror.
Yeah, I think that is, a lot of the things I talked about in my assessments were things about, that we all talk about in coachings and other assessments, the idea of keeping your, a nice arch to the right hand, left hand, we're always talking about flyaway fingers or violin position. And these are a lot of things, I think, while you're practicing, if you could see this, it would be much easier to correct almost in real time. There's sort of this self-assessment that you could do. I think it's a great way to spot problems. It's a great way to almost have the perspective of what the instructor sees and what, we're going to see when we watch the exams. So a lot of these things, I think over time, your right hand could be collapsing a little bit and you don't notice. And before you notice your basically your wrist is down and you're plucking from the middle joint or something, and these are things that you could fix very easily if you just set up a space where you practice with a mirror. If you go to let's say like a dance studio, yoga studio, or a karate dojo, they have the whole mirrored walls. I think that's so great to have, and it's helped me a lot in my development over time. And if you don't have a mirror, sometimes I'll turn on my video camera, not recording, but just practice, and I can just see what's going on right there. Because we don't have a great view from our own perspective a lot of times when we're playing. So Nikki, I think that can really help.
Nikki, did you ever use a mirror when you were practicing as a student?
Yes, and I use a mirror now. I have this gigantic mirror I found in a market, like secondhand market. When I saw it, I looked at it and said, "We'll practice a mirror." I was like really high as a person and tall as a person, but I think it does all the difference. Sometimes it's weird at the beginning because you might see yourself the other way around. But once you get used to it, you don't want to get rid of it anymore.
Yeah, I remember getting one that that you're meant to, it's intended to be mounted to the back of a door, but I would have it wherever I wanted to practice in my place, I could just bring it with me. So I have my guitar and then this big mirror that, I mean, then it's not heavy, but it's it's nice because you can just set it up. I can set it up to get a side angle. I could do all sorts of things, but I think it's really really helpful.
Bill over in California said, unfortunately, he can't use a mirror because he's so handsome. He just gets distracted. So
that's an issue that,
And lastly, you wanted to talk a little bit about the slurs that came up in practice routine 10.
Yeah, I think, and this is something, again, that, a lot of the things I mentioned could be remedied very easily by, I think, people just seeing it. Because a lot of times I've seen people even write comments back to me after the evaluation and say, now that I look back at the video, now I see it. I can see what you're talking about. So I think a big thing was with the slurs is that sometimes we would get this pulling of the string, like the which I guess could be cool with blues, but and I think an easy way that I've been telling people to fix that is one of the things would be to revisit some of the older material on the CGC site with there's lessons on slurs, descending and ascending, descending slurs. And I always think it's a great idea to go back and review a lot of that stuff. And it doesn't mean that you have to go back and do remedial work. It's just a way to check in with your technique and just make sure, we're in a good place. So I would just recommend this idea of almost this opposing pressure to kind of stabilize the string. So much, I guess, we're focused on the string that's executing the slur that a lot of times we're bringing everything with it. So the idea, if we think of this opposing motion, that'll kind of stabilize the string, and then when we execute the slur, the string's we're not bending it. So that's one thing that I think is again, it's an easy fix if you can see it, and also if you can hear it, that you can hear that you're bending the pitch.
Nice. Well, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Nikki, and Nikki is going to start with something a little bit different than we've talked about before. This is not technique, but it is very applicable to practice to exam submissions.
Yeah, I was thinking about what to say because some of the things are recurrent, and we already did one of these live streams about exams, and I didn't want to repeat myself. But of course, there are other things that we can talk about from the very beginning, like what camera angle and camera shot I choose. Doesn't have to be fancy, but I think we have seen a lot of different settings, and some of them even like a little bizarre. And it's not about anything. It doesn't have to be professional or in a studio. It has to be your home where you're comfortable, but and with maybe you're recording with a phone. Doesn't have to be a super high quality camera. That's not at all what we're looking for. We're looking at your playing, your level, where you are at, how comfortable you are with performance and with the pieces you're playing. But like what I think is that rule one should be, we want to see the whole guitar, at least both hands. I think we've seen a lot of weird angles where one hand is left out, or even the best, both hands left out.
That's excellent right hand technique there, James.
Or sometimes a camera that comes on a weird angle, so one hand is not, like, you can see it but not really much. For instance, if you put the camera right on this side of your right hand, you don't see much of what's happening on the right hand, and probably your right hand is getting in the way of the left hand as well. So I would rather go with a frontal shot. And if you can have it, maybe one good thing, I always found it very interesting, if you have a music stand, you don't have to have anything fancy. Let's do it homemade. So whatever you have in the house, but a music stand with the holes behind, so not one of those steady big and heavy stands, but maybe one of the other ones with the holes, where you can place it and change the height of it and put it there in front of you. That would be already fantastic. And just what I do when I record myself, one thing that I hate so much, especially when I'm alone and I don't have anybody helping me out, is that I record 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and I go back and look what is actually on the phone there. And then I make sure I don't move the chair. I'll leave it there. If I want to take 100 takes, I'll leave it there, set up all day, so I don't change anything in the camera shot. So that for me, it's a good thing. And I know that I'm going to say something and maybe it's not going to be super popular. If you feel shy, don't worry about that. But for me, it's also great when I see the face of a person playing. I mean, there's so many reasons why maybe somebody doesn't want to appear in the camera. Absolutely fine. I don't care. But I remember one time I did this exam. It was a voice exam. I was already nervous. I was playing Dowland and singing Dowland, so I was not paying attention to it. I played it, and the professor said, "Fantastic. Next time, put a clip on your hair." I couldn't see your face. and she said the face is part of the performance as well, and that remained like that phrase is like still stuck in my head. Yes, indeed, it's part of the performance.
Yeah, I was just reviewing an exam the other day, and I wanted to take a screenshot, although I'd have to ask the permission of this person, but it was actually my favorite. I was like, that's it, that's the angle. And for me, what I like is probably about eye height of the person, a little to the left, like their left, so that it gets a view down the string, so you can see the point of contact with the right hand fingers. And you also, because it's a little elevated about eye height, you can also see quite a good angle of the left hand as well. Because the right, I will say, the left hand's easier to see in general. The right hand, however, if you're behind it, you don't see anything. Depending on technique, sometimes you can see the fingers depressing a little bit. But it really, if it comes from your left as a player, is that stage left? I don't know what it is. But it allows you to see the fingertips, and that's crucial in giving right hand feedback about the right hand in terms of finger movement. Nikki, the second one was on vibrato. Yes,
vibrato. First of all, you all need to pronounce it with the rolling R. I'm just joking. So, this is a little bit more advanced, but maybe people in the chat, from members in the chat, will know that I'm talking mostly about grade 5s, because grade 5 people have vibrato technique in their exam submission. And one thing that I noticed, or I found myself saying it repeatedly, is that sometimes I see too much effort for not much of a result in vibrato. So first of all, what we're looking for in a vibrato, and we are entering on a high level of philosophy also, because what is vibrato? Vibrato is a change in pitch, is an oscillation in the pitch going back and forth. It's easy to understand it when we are singing, because the singing vibrato, it's easier to make instead of vibrato on a string. It's a tiny bit more difficult because it has a mechanical thing implied, a mechanical movement. But what I often see, it's a lot of pressure. And when too much pressure on a vertical side, so let me take the guitar very quickly. I don't want to stay too much here, but if we apply too much pressure down, but we actually don't pull the string, so really, literally, the strings are elastic, so we can really pull the string and change the pitch like that. But if we apply too much pressure, we move the finger, but we're not moving the string at all. If we don't put enough pressure, we might just move the finger a lot, but again, we don't hear any change of pitch. So since in the classical guitar corner curriculum, we are approaching the vibrato in a very mechanical and rhythmical way, So there's a rhythmical approach to it. What I encourage people is when you're playing the vibrato just one or other side, so you do just towards the head of the guitar, you really want to hear that change in pitch. And when you do the opposite, same. And when you pull them together, you try to recall what was the amount of pressure that you actually need in for the vibrato technique, and try to build it little by little, but always pay attention to that nice change in the pitch. And when you put them together, don't rush at the beginning, because that very fast movement, I think it's more valuable if we build it slowly first. So we can really, oh yes, now I hear that that I'm looking for. Because when you apply it to the pieces, then you want your fingers to be automatically going towards the right movement. We cannot think about that in the pieces. So we build it on the technique exercises, and then we internalize it, and then when we play, we have it. And it's not about too much pressure. So that first, not too much and not too little. It's somewhat in the middle. And once you play, then relax. Don't stay there grabbing the guitar like, oh God, my fingers are stuck. Because that's another sensation I have when it's like people remain stuck there.
You know, seeing as we have a very accomplished electric guitarist in our presence, James, would you be able to show us what string, like the bending on the electric guitar looks like, and why that's different, how the mechanics of that is different?
Sure.
You don't have to plug it in or anything, just what it looks like.
Let me can I just grab one right?
Sorry, I'm surprising James with a request here. We didn't plan this.
Yeah, I can try to do it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a little different on the electric guitar, and that's one of the things. You know, slurs and vibrato really changed when I went from electric guitar to classical guitar, because sometimes on electric guitar, it's more like with the pull off, or that's, you know, kind of like the language we use on electric guitar. It's more like you can almost just lift off, and you'll get, you know, it'll sound. Sometimes on nylon string, of course, when we lift off, the sound just disappears very quickly. So we need to have that more articulate movement with the slur. And with the vibrato, it tends to be more, you know, it's almost like almost like this kind of motion, as opposed to, you know, that. And sometimes, I mean, if I want to do a very exaggerated vibrato on in a classical guitar piece, more modern music, sometimes I will use, you know, my rock and roll vibrato if I do need it at times. But, you know, of course, normal. And it helps to see the face, because sometimes the face can.
Yeah, that's right.
It helps move the pitch a little bit more. Yeah. But yeah,
Matteo Mella called that the third eye.
Supporting the idea of filming the face as well.
Yes,
exactly.
The eyebrow goes up, and then it's.
If we can't hear the vibrato, at least we can see the vibrato on the face.
That's right.
Yeah, as opposed to like.
Well, I think.
But yeah, it is a different motion.
Sorry, what was that, Nikki?
Can we make it a requirement for grade 5?
Facial vibrato. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll start out with eyebrow exercises, you know, and then with rhythms, and
with the metronome. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, James, for about 30 seconds there, the coolness factor of this live stream went way up.
That's true.
But it's not.
now it's gone again.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Nikki. So connected to the left arm is the left hand is the forearm, and connected to the forearm is the elbow.
I
feel like there's a song coming on.
So I'll be quick, because there's much to say about it, but the most simple thing that I want to mention is simply what I see many times in the left hand it's an elbow that goes up and it doesn't stay down enough. What does it do when it goes up? Not just it tenses up. Like, I encourage everyone to just do these and feel what you feel changing position in your elbow, what you feel inside, like in the nerves, in the tendons, in the shoulder, because the shoulder starts to be stressed and tense. And we simply, the rule is that we want to avoid tension. Easy to say, difficult to do. But one thing that you can do is really be more grounded, and whatever you can let go towards the gravity, let it go towards the gravity. So the elbow is one of those elements. It's one, also these other elbow is just, they are both going towards the gravity, with the gravity. So one thing is, like, you let go your arm, you probably don't see much of what I'm doing, but you let go your arm and you just stick it up. This is the right position and the correct position, that you don't need anything else, and you not need to do that. One more thing that happens when we do these is that we cannot place our left hand fingers anymore in an effective way, because they will press in a very superficial way. You will need so much effort in your left hand fingers. Instead of staying like that, you can use more of your weight, the weight of the fingers. It's like making it hanging in there, like really, really relaxed. And the elbow helps to find the correct position of the left hand fingers. So that for me is a very important thing. If you practice with the mirror, there you go. You can see your left hand. But also, if you record yourself, pay attention to these things as well. As you watch your videos, don't pay attention only to the notes, correct or not correct. Pay attention to the posture as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, Mr. Dave, we are continuing on the left-hand theme, and you wanted to start out talking about lifting of the left-hand fingers.
Yeah, so one thing, I mostly graded grade 2 exams this time. I had a few grade 3s and grade 5s as well. And I was pointing this out in all of them, almost all of them. I noticed a lot of times when a finger would lift off the fingerboard, that either the pinky, it's usually the pinky, would curl in to the palm of the hand, or it would push out away from the fingerboard. Both were happening. So it's just an involuntary motion that's causing the finger to go too far away from the strings. And so just to illustrate on the instrument, it's usually something like this, that kind of motion. And you can even see the wrist often move. It pulls the whole hand out of position usually, or that kind of thing. So it pulls the hand away from the guitar. And when the finger is too far away from the fretboard, then when it's needed, it has a long distance to travel to get back, and that can really cause some accuracy issues. So I pointed a lot of folks to the fixed fingers exercises. So in grade 2, they're kind of looking forward to grade 3, and they get the fixed fingers in, I think it's practice routine 6 and 8. One is ascending and the other is descending. So this descending fixed fingers is a really important one, where you leave all the fingers down and lift one at a time. But for my grade 2 folks, I had a lot of them just working on one finger at a time. So playing 4, 3, and stopping, and making sure that you're in full control of the lifting of that finger, so you can be very accurate with that lifting. Because at first, especially if you go too quickly, you're going to repeat that problem. That involuntary motion is going to kick in because it's built into the muscle memory. And so just going very slowly to control the motion of the finger, and then working up to a tempo so that you can play it very relaxed in a rhythm. And from there, adding another finger. And this is where the challenge gets even more difficult, because now you're not only controlling the one finger, but the others. They're both hovering at the same time. And then finally 2, 1, and now you're controlling 3 fingers that are hovering. Just a really simple breakdown of that fixed fingers exercise, so you can take it one step at a time. Yeah.
Very nice. And then weighting of the voices in the music can be both in the left and the right hand. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I had a lot of folks submitting both the set piece for grade 2, which is Giuliani Etude number 1, and source study number 9. And in source study number 9, we have this arpeggio figure all the way throughout. And what I noticed most often in a lot of folks' submissions was giving equal weight to all of the voices, like this. But of course, in the music, we have stems that are pointing down and stems that are pointing up to indicate that there are separate voices here. One of the things that makes guitar notation a little maddening. And so what I recommended for a lot of folks to do is not so much producing weight by putting more weight onto a string with a finger, but instead lowering the volume of the other fingers to bring out that melody note. So it would sound something more like... So it really creates a nice contrast between the accompanying arpeggio underneath and the melody. What that does, though, is it creates this longer line on the top. Which really can be obscured if all of the notes are very even. It doesn't sound quite as clear of a melody in that case. So just really backing off of those accompanying fingers can help bring those notes out quite a bit more. And then the same applies to the left hand. The left hand can do a lot of work to create independent lines. So we have this really tricky section. I think it's by far the hardest part to play of all of the grade 2 material in Giuliani's Etude 1. Everyone knows it as the tricky bit. And it's this measure 9 through 12, but especially this bit in measure 10. Which requires a lot of independence in the left hand to play well. But the reason it's important to hold fingers down for their the full duration of the note that's written is we get this long line on the top which contrasts with this beautiful middle voice. But if you're not holding all the fingers down because of the difficulties of independence, it sounds more like bouncing chords. And so, yes, keeping those fingers down for the full duration of the notes that are written is really important and can help create some weight in those voices and separate voices.
Yeah, I think the musical payoff with that is achieving what drew many people to the guitar in the first place, the classical guitar in particular, the sound of one instrument sounding like multiple instruments. So how are you doing that? How are you making the one guitar is playing a melody line, the other one's playing accompaniment, we're getting the band back together. So that's the musical payoff for those technical challenges, and that's why it's a bit of a gauntlet, a bit of a that's why we have that piece as the set piece.
Yeah.
Now we're going to wax a little philosophical.
Yeah. So
talk about the significance of the exam process.
Right. You know, it's funny because these exams they're big milestones. There's a lot of celebration that happens when someone passes their exam. You can kind of let your hair down after you're done and really celebrate and maybe not play your guitar for a little while. So there's a lot that goes into them. We recommend spending, and Simon's going to talk a little bit more about this, but we recommend spending anywhere from 6 to 18 months per grade, and the latter time is the more advisable one for us. And that means you're spending a lot of time with this material. And sometimes we get exams that folks are just not ready to move to the next grade. And we're always looking for whether someone's ready for the more difficult material ahead. And sometimes that material in the next grade can be like a shiny object that folks are pushing for, and they really want to get to. Maybe they're bored with the repertoire they've been working on. and they really want to get to the next thing. And that can cause sometimes rushing through the material, not spending enough time with it. And I think it's important to kind of keep in mind when you're approaching these exams what their significance is for you, what you want to get out of learning classical guitar, what your goals are. That should always be forward presented in your mind. But, I think if you're pushing forward too quickly, it can easily frustrate your goals and cause obstacles to actually getting to your destination. And so, yeah, it's okay to slow down and take your time. It's okay to be bored with the material, in fact. There are some solutions to that, but I think every time I've heard someone say, I'm getting bored with this material, I've heard Simon say, that's when you should stick with it longer. And I completely agree. I think that's usually when you start to find new things with the piece that you couldn't see before because you were patient and you stuck with it. So for me, the significance of these exams and the feedback that we provide, you'll notice we put a lot of time into our responses, is it's not existential. It doesn't tell you about what kind of musician you are or what kind of person you are or anything like that. It's just you're ready to move on to the next material. Just a very simple kind of analysis for us. So
I'd be curious, Nikki and James, do you have any stories that you could share about your own experience with this kind of thing? I know I have my own. I could tell you a ton of them. But in your own experience, and maybe you don't, but where you either had to take some steps backwards because a mentor said, look, you need to work on your technique and reform this, or you found yourself going down a pathway of playing pieces that were too hard and that was a problem. Do you have any stories like that? All right, Nikki's nodding her head, so I'm going to go with you first, Nikki.
Yes, I'm going to tell this story because I think it's fun. It was frustrating for me, but I did my conservatory and I went on. I thought I could play, of course, and I love playing, and I love playing the guitar, but I don't know if I knew how to study. That's a very different thing. I was young and I was doing a lot of things encouraged by my teacher. I did, and I arrived to the diploma. I did the diploma. It went very well, got out of it, and I said, man, I can't play the guitar. I was like, it went very well, but for that moment probably, but like Nikki moving on was like, wait, and then that's when I went to an academy in Milan. I studied with Bruno Giuffredi, and guess what we started doing? Open strings. And it changed, it blew my mind, it changed. I completely went to the basics, even though I was playing Giuliani, Rossignana #1 in my diploma. But then I really hit a wall where I said, I don't really know if I know how to study and I can play the guitar, but I cannot say why. And that was a big moment for me, frustration, and it was so great to go back to something very basic and relearn, especially why things work and why they don't work.
Thank you for sharing that story, Nikki. James, how about? This is story time. We're sharing and caring.
Yeah. There were times where I would play a piece that I obviously wasn't ready for, and it almost had that feeling like I could get through it, but it was like when you had this anxiety of like you're about to miss your bus or your train, and you're running and you're like running to the platform, and you just make it and you just get through. It'd be like just getting through the piece, but you're like exhausted, Whereas there was repertoire that I should have been playing where it would have felt like you were 10, 15 minutes early for your train, and you could just wait there and buy a coffee, and you had no anxiety, and so it was kind of like that. And I remember a teacher of mine one time just told me, I guess when I was struggling through something that was too difficult, saying if it's always a struggle, it's not really a lot of fun, is it? And that kind of stayed with me, that, it wasn't, it was a lot of kind of anxiety and extra tension. And I always feel like if there's tension, I skipped a step in the process somewhere, if there's this extra tension. And I think that was, and I had a similar experience when I went to the university. All of a sudden, it's like, here's this simple etude or study, and I'm thinking like, oh, I was just listening to like La Cathedral in the car. Can't we do this? Can't we play that? So it was, sometimes it was taking a step back, and then in the long run, you realize how much of a benefit that was to just take a step back, or several.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that story too. There's a really nice segue that came in the comments. Martha made a comment saying, many of us who worked with private teachers were encouraged to keep moving ahead before we were ready, almost as if the teacher was the one getting bored with material. So I wanted to start by talking about the teacher's experience through this process. That's a really nice segue, Martha. Thank you for that. It's true. I don't know if it's necessarily, for me, it wasn't that I was getting bored with this, because I've done this as a teacher too. I think it's hard as a teacher to say no to a student. If they're really excited about working on a piece and they've got the heart set on it, it lights them up in a way that, some study doesn't. It's very hard as a teacher to say, no, maybe in 3 years, let's do this first. There's often a negotiating process that has to happen with students, especially with adults, because, at a certain point, adults sort of say, you know what, I'm not really looking to do this properly. I just want to enjoy myself right now. And who are we to say they can or cannot do that? It ultimately rests with the student. Mm-hmm. But what's hard for a teacher, I think, is to stick to their guns of holding back the wild horses of like, well, we can listen to Asturias, we can listen to La Catedral, but this playing here will make you feel empowered over the long term, where instead of getting the two marshmallows now, the one marshmallow now instead of getting the two marshmallows later. That's a famous study of self-restraint in children. But I will say that I think that's part of it. When I was a novice teacher, when I first moved to New York, I was teaching little kids and some adults. I was terrible. I am embarrassed to go back and imagine what I was doing, but I was really just saying yes way too much and not giving any real guidance and no structure. And I found that hard. But one of the for me, my story about going backwards type thing, the biggest gift from a teacher I ever got was from Rafael Agostino in Sydney. And I had facility as a student. I know a first year student in university. I had facility. I could do things very much like what James is saying. It's like, yeah, you can, but you feel, you're strained at the end, or like you're all just barely hanging on. He just took everything off my plate and gave me one piece, and we stuck with it for months and months and months and months. It was the greatest gift I ever had as a student, because that changed everything about the way I operated. And to feel in control and in command of playing the guitar is quite a feeling. And you can get it as a grade 1, grade 2 player, but you need to stay there for a while. And another remarkable comment from I think, quite a master teacher, when Chris Mallett was on the podcast. I know I've referenced this a number of times, but I asked him once, what's the longest amount of time you've had someone play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, which is at the early stages of his Suzuki? He said, 2 years. Now that's impressive on the parent and the teacher, and impressive all around. Then apparently the student sort of took off. It took him a long time to just get the ball rolling, but I thought that was an amazing story. So that's part of the teacher's experience. I think definitely my own experience. I can't speak for everybody, but in terms of one of the challenges of saying no and sort of being a bit of a taskmaster or negotiating that aspect. I will say in terms of this exam experience, there's a couple of things that happen really quickly with the exams. Raphael, who I mentioned before, used to say, because he does a lot of these AMEB, similar type exams in Australia, he used to say, you can tell how someone's going to play by the way they take the guitar out of the case. It's like there's a certain care and presentation and approach that really resonates through very, very well, even just on videos that someone's taken the time to prepare, They've been diligent. They've been patient. They've actually watched the lessons in the curriculum. They may have corresponded with people, the teachers, or gone to coaching calls, and it really shines through. And we're very, I think, as teachers, very grateful when we come across those. It's just very clear very quickly. So preparation is so key to this process, and just rushing to the point where you can get the right notes at the right time, sort of. In my opinion, it sort of defeats the purpose a little bit of this process. In terms of timeline, which Dave started alluding to, I regret somewhat this is my own doing in the academy. There's sometimes cultures that develop. One of them is with metronomes that James is mentioning, and I think that sort of developed because people saw other people's practice routine submissions that have metronomes, so then they do it. But it's never been requested. So similarly with the timeline, people will often say in their self-assessment on the exams, "Oh, I plan to do the next grade in 6 months," and we all go, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Let's just wait and see about that." It's just like that. Grade 1, grade 2, maybe, especially if you've had prior experience and you're going back. Sure, that's fair enough. But I think just reining in a little bit about terms of timeline expectations and seeing it as not necessarily a finishing line to get over, but something to look back and say, I've done all this work. I may as well submit an exam now, because that might reflect all of this work that's very holistic work, as opposed to just the narrow track of fulfill the criteria just to get across the line. I want to give an example of someone who shall remain nameless, who this round actually decided not to submit last submission period and just spent another 6 months on the same pieces, and that musician reflected that it was a very positive experience, that they found more control, more finesse. And I think that just that once you get to that place where you're being bored with a piece of music, usually it's because you're not learning the notes anymore. So you can start focusing on musicality, you can start focusing on being polished, which is like really, or being creative, and experimenting a little bit once the technical stuff has been taken care of. So that's why I sort of think when people start saying they're bored, it's time to really start becoming musical and exploring. I mean, I'm not saying that's where you start becoming musical, but it means you're not having to juggle all of these different things of learning the notes, playing, learning new techniques, being stretched, but now you're in command, and then what are you going to do with it? That's a whole nother thing to look forward to. So we've got 5 minutes left. I wonder if anyone had any questions for the quartet. Could you?
There's so many good comments in the chat. I have the chat open there, and I think this triggered a lot from members.
Oh, good, yeah.
I want to add something to your very, very useful thoughts, Simon, because I think this is goes to the whole point of the exams. I would say that for me, what's really good about playing and what makes sense when we play is being able to play a piece well and being happy with it. So besides the goals that we have, I want to play that, we all have them, but there's nothing like being so satisfied by a piece we play that we want to play it over and over. That, I think, is the most satisfaction out of it. So I would say to submit an exam when one of your pieces required for the exam, you feel you really like it and you want to play it. Now you have to play it, but you want to play it. I wouldn't say all 3 or 4, because maybe you don't like equally all of them, but that might be a good self evaluation before deciding when to submit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. I'm scrolling through some of these questions. I'm going to just read out them. We have to wrap up a few pretty quickly. But Kerry asked, there were many, almost all of them really, that mentioned turning on the camera and recording a good take was really difficult. Any advice to prepare for performance for a grade submission?
Yes, sometimes what I suggested to a few people who said they had anxiety once they hit the record button is to just intend that the first time you're going to run through it, that this is just a run through. This is just a sound check. But record it, because sometimes that can turn out to be the best one, where there's no pressure. You're kind of thinking of it as it's going to be a throwaway take, but sometimes that might turn out to be the best one, because sometimes take after take after take, after a while, it's just you're just kind of exhausting yourself, and I think usually the early ones are always better. But and I also would recommend people to, before they submit, practice in regular intervals recording yourself and recording your pieces, and it'll help with all the things we talked about: camera angle, sound issues, all sorts of stuff.
I used to use that trick all the time, very successfully, as a portrait photographer. I was taking photos of musicians who don't normally want to be photographed or the center of attention, and we would have an hour and 45 minutes of a photo shoot. And then at that point, it's be like, great, we've got it. We can pack up now. Hang on, let's just try over there. One more thing. And then because I've said, we got it, we're done, it's always the shots in the last 15 minutes that were the ones we ended up using because they were relaxed. So it's, you can play mental, even though you're the one going to have to trick yourself. You still can play those games of doing all these takes and finally going, yep, that one's good enough. I'll just do a couple more and see what happens. Then you can just, knowing that you've got one in the can, so to speak, and be interesting to see what mental result that would do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess it's frustrating because it's self-inflicted, the anxiety of hitting record, and it's now it's recording. But yeah, I think it could work both ways. Yeah, either the early ones, or once you have one that you're comfortable with, let's just do one more and see how it goes.
Dave, I'd like you just to speak very briefly on. Well, I guess we already covered this, but did we talk really about resubmits and passes and what we're hoping for those people? I will say we agonize over the ones that we're not sure about. We often correspond with one another. Could you please have a look at this? What are your thoughts? These are not decisions we take lightly. So, Dave, for you, what's the rationale between saying to someone, we're not going to pass you this time and we'd like you to resubmit?
Yeah, it's always about how prepared you are for the material that lies ahead. I'm usually thinking of specific pieces that they're going to encounter, the practice routines that are ahead, the sort of things that we look for in the next exam, how frustrating it could be for them to move forward into that experience, or whether they're prepared enough to really take on those challenges. That's sort of the way that I think about it at every step. And I did have a couple of resubmits this time, and every time I have to do, I am always tortured, yes. But every time I ask someone to resubmit, I mention to them, don't be discouraged by this. It's just another step on the journey. I think that's a really important mindset to have, that asking you to go back and continue to work on this material, especially if you feel bored, that sort of, we've talked about that already, but if you already feel like I've worked on this stuff to death, it can sound very, I don't know, like a death sentence almost to say, go work on that stuff again. But I think there are also strategies you can use. For instance, if you have a lot of technical habits that you've built into the material from a particular grade, it can be useful to work on some fresh material at that grade level. But making sure not to push yourself beyond it so that you can really take time to work out those technical things or maybe musical items that really need development. And so another thing I also recommend to folks is to take a sabbatical where they're just focused on the things that we are giving them in their feedback. Take 1 to 2 months. Usually 2 months is a good time for new habits to form. So if you're really careful and you spend 2 months with positive, accurate repetitions on something, it's often seeping into your muscle memory, building those new neural pathways, and you can really rely on it for a long time to come after.
Yeah, and I've always been really careful not to ever use the word fail. It's not a pass-fail. It's just passing on to the next stuff or asking someone to resubmit, because really there's no failure anywhere in this process. It's a success to submit, to put in that work and that effort. And then it's a great gift if a teacher is willing to not pass you because they're thinking on your behalf, no, look, this might be a frustrating moment for you, but in 6 months, you'll be better for it. And for the next 10 years, you'll be better for it. It really is. We're always thinking on the student's behalf. And CGC is not going to gel with everybody because nothing gels with everybody. But for those people who are okay, or just believe us, trust us that we're thinking on their behalf, I think it could be a real positive contribution. James and Nikki, do you have any final words or final thoughts before we wrap things up?
As far as the resubmitting, I kind of think of it as, if I was a personal trainer and someone was struggling with a 100-pound bench press and I said, let's throw another 50 on each side, I wouldn't be really doing them a favor, at all.
That's great. I've never thought of that. That's brilliant.
And I think, though, there can be a feeling of like, I would understand the feeling of being like, oh, I got left back, like if you, but I think, like you said, another step in the journey. And then, 6 months, a year from now, they could be in a totally different place. Or you don't know where they could have, if you just let them go, they could have gotten so discouraged that they stopped playing or something.
Right.
Nikki, do you want to say anything, or do you want to just...
That was just a perfect analogy.
I love it. I've never heard... I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that, James. It's fantastic.
That's so true, because I never had that brilliant idea of that brilliant image to use, but I often refer to learning a sport or going to the gym, because that's what you do when you learn a sport. You have to train, and training, you need to repeatedly do something until your body can do it. But we understand as humans a lot that if you don't do it, you hurt yourself. But when it comes to fingers, it's like, well, I cannot hurt myself. No, you can. If you continue like doing something that is bad, and bad habits will lead you to pain, to something bad, and then that is hard to fix later on. So it's better to fix it before than after. But thank you, James. Can I steal that?
Sure.
So good.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave, James, and Nikki, and thank you to everyone who watched today. There was a lot of people tuned in today. It was great. I think
there's a word that you have to say. It starts with G and it ends with est.
So tomorrow, if you didn't know, we're having Oktoberfest, and Nikki has put in a ton of work over the last months preparing all of this. It's going to start tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Yes. Nikki,
I was going to get zapped if I did it the wrong time. But it's going to start at 4 p.m. All CGC members are invited. Please tune in. It's going to be a great weekend. So I'm not going to do a little tag at the end. I'm just going to leave everyone with the quartet saying goodbye. So thanks, everyone, for a great season. I'll be back. We'll all be back in like 2021 for the next CGC show. Take care, and see a lot of you tomorrow.